Assassin's Promise by Thomas Woodward. Chapter 55. The wide clay steps leveled out to a great raised platform, upon which stood the vast, cavernous opening to the domed building. Beyond the bronze-wrought doors was cloaked in shadow. I could almost make out a faint stairway circling away into the gloom. Outside, the sun shone down on us. I had to squint and cover my eyes against the blinding glare. Unable to focus on the dome for more than a second, I could feel the heat reflecting back at me harshly as the day crept onward. As I drew closer to the building, I noticed smaller jade statuettes that ringed the building. Each had been shaped into a human-like figure, although many had bird-like qualities. My mind glimpsed the earlier vision I had seen for a moment, human-like figures alighting on the walls of the city as other figures fell to meet a foe. Something unnamed. A blinding pain caused me to stagger, and I stopped trying to recall the image abruptly. I had seen something no human had been prepared for. My mind was still fragmented from the ordeal. Pulling myself towards the great wall of the temple, I steadied myself for a moment. The robed figure had paused, aware of me without turning, waiting patiently. The deep smell of spices, herbs, and something caustic filled my senses. Sulfur? I was unsure. The strange aroma was overpowering. I thought I began to see the trace of an outline, an image. The robed figure moved in front of me, breaking my line of sight and directing my attention to him. "You must eat. Rest. I will watch you. You will tell me more of what we wish to know. But first, food, rest, sleep." The tone was disjointed, as if the figure had changed his mind abruptly several times in the middle of his speech. With a small step, he began to walk past the great domed building. I followed its curvature, unsure of where I would be led next. I feared and thrilled what I might see in equal measure. I had visions of enormous goblets of jade and sapphire, laying strewn about like toys in streams of gold. As we rounded the curve of the massive structure, I saw an enormous pool stretched before us. It was the length of a city building. Pillars rose from the turquoise waters. Lush plants grew heavy around it. Majestic ferns and trees that held golden fruit lulled me further. I saw movement in the waters and could not fathom what might live among the shallow depths. Bracing myself, I stepped forward softly, no longer aware of the strange guide who had led me here. Moving forward with greater urgency, I quickly came to a great tree and pulled one of the ripe fruit from its boughs. The taste of it was sweet, with a hint of spices, the grainy feel of the fruit's skin rough on my tongue. I gobbled it down with reckless abandon and reached for another. Sharper movement pulled my vision back to the shallows. Then I saw it. Polished moon silver, on the surface of the water, swept forward and resolved into a human-like figure, unashamed in their nakedness. A long wave of silver spilled down her back, tresses metallic and smooth to the water's touch. I gaped like a schoolboy. I was unable to steal my gaze away from the scene that was unfolding before me. With a flourish of movement, the lithe form disappeared again beneath the waters. Slowly I became aware of my lingering hunger as I waited, fearing to take any action, lest I wake from this dream. I turned to catch a glimpse of my guide. I could see a distant robed figure who stood unmoving against the horizon. Squinting, I could not make out more detail. A rush of water swelled around me, and I was pulled from my perch at the edge of the pool. I could feel gentle arms wrap around me, somehow dispelling the terror that began to well up in me. I struggled for breath, but in a heartbeat the moment had passed. I was left sitting dazedly up to my chest in the cool turquoise waters, glistening drops falling from my face. It felt wonderful. I felt the warmth of a hand on my back and barely stopped myself from crying out, quickly leaping to my feet. Turning, I could see beauty made flesh. The silvery ringlets framing a slender face with delicate features. Only then did I realize their eyes held no irises and were a deeper amber hue. The swell of her form made me blush, turning away to shield myself from further embarrassment. A strange musical voice echoed softly back to me. "Tell me your name. I will tell you mine. It was hypnotic. I responded before thinking. My name is Edward Gelmain, but I go by Eddie. The deep amber eyes took me in. Her features became pensive for a moment before she replied, I don't have a name. She made a sound like silvery chimes, then smiled shyly. That is my name, she said, her smile deepening. What may I call you? I fear I may not pronounce your name correctly, I stammered, careful to avert my gaze. She showed no reaction to her nudity, stepping closer to me, as if wondering why I was looking away. A curious expression replaced her warm smile, and she reached out to place her palm on my chest. Why do you move away from me? Are you fearful? You are very cautious. Inakal has guided you to me. Come, rest, eat, sleep. I am here as your guide. I will not harm you. I follow the ancient treaty. Her voice still held the musical notes, and the sound of it seemed to lull me. I felt an exhaustion seep into me, mixed with other stronger emotions. Her last comment made me wonder what treaty she could possibly be referring to. Had others come here before? Stannon and I had barely made the trek, having pushed blindly out into the sand. Surely only a handful of others over the years would have been able to make their way here. Part of me still questioned whether what I saw was even real. I will call you Eve. I've always thought it a beautiful name. Would that offend you? She smiled and splashed a wave of cool water at me playfully, disappearing again beneath the waves. I sat back down in the cool water and wondered if it was safe to drink. I had not had anything to quench my thirst since the day before. I felt something touch my feet, a small tug. Giving in, I moved farther out into the blue expanse. Eve poked her head above the water next to me. Come. We will need to go further out. There is a spring with clear water just beyond the far edge there. Do you know how to swim? I nodded indignantly, although I hadn't swam in years. I idly worried what would happen if I found myself exhausted in the middle of the pool. How far down did it go? I could not see farther than a few feet below me. The shimmering water had an opaque cast to it. I decided to wait before drinking anything. What was she? I had never seen another person with eyes like that. They were startling amber, like the mask of a man so long ago. I tried to push the memory down, but it came flooding back regardless. I waited expectantly, dazzled by the group of performers I had seen. The townsfolk had all gathered in front of the inn, the tallest building at the very center of our flyspeck village. As a young boy, I wanted to see the strong man. They had arms as thick as tree trunks. But more than anything, I craved a performance from the Marvel Man himself. They were rare beyond anything. Only 1 in 1,000 troops of performers boasted the presence of such a figure. No one in living memory had seen one. The townsfolk had heard stories from their grandparents the last time one had crossed the desert. We waited, anxious energy buzzing through us. The mayor had agreed to pay gold for the performance. It was an ancient greeting that had been around since the beginning of time. The troupe would be given the choice of rain or gold. It must have been a holdover from an earlier time. I moved up behind the mayor, standing no taller than his waist. An excited murmur of voices scattered around the group. People who had never seen any performer were grinning like children on feast day. The performers had set their tents far away, past the edge of town as was customary. The darkness of the hot desert night was palpable. Anticipation burned within us. The minutes pulled away agonizingly. Still no performers appeared. Only a dim circle of lamplight swayed over the square from the inn's heavy lantern. Only the sound of the swaying sign and the heavy sighs of men and women filled the air. A strange light appeared far away, softly swaying back and forth. It was greenish yellow and held a sickly cast. I struggled to squint but could not make it out. It appeared to be a dancing light like foxfire. I knew it must be something more mundane. It weaved and danced before our eyes, never stopping to alight. The townsfolk grew silent, a mixture of awe and apprehension pulling over them. Then the light became 2. They continued to dance hypnotically, weaving and swaying with a ghost-like quality. In another breath, the 2 became 4, and then 8. The lights began to widen their circle and move closer around us. The methodical swaying of lights lulled us further. A small child whispered anxiously to his parents in high-pitched tones of excitement. The mother shushed him calmly, unable to tear her gaze away from the dancing lights. The faint greenish yellow grew brighter, more distinct. I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. I stood transfixed along with the rest of the townsfolk. Hardly a murmur rose among us gathered there. The lights continued to dance, moving closer then farther away, taunting us, beckoning us. One of the young boys started to drift towards one of them, but his mother admonished him and held him close, a scolding tone in her voice. Her husband began to drift forward even as she spoke to their son. I could hear a faint chiming of bells in the air. There was a metallic sound to it, as if something was clinking together softly. Still no voices from singers or brightly dressed dancers appeared. The people must be hidden to view. A single mournful note rose into the air, as if a piper wept over his music, so soft and beautiful it was. The note was long and clear, then faded into the dark stillness of the night. The lights spun faster, weaving and changing their seemingly random paths as they crossed in front of our vision. Faster and faster. 8 became 16. Faster and faster. The lights churned, whirling through the air. The brightness grew in intensity until the glare was blinding and white-hot. The air seemed to crackle with movement and electricity. Sparks of heat and fire could be seen spilling into the night above the strobing lights. Children started to cry, a young girl whimpering against the front of her mother's apron. I stood fast behind the mayor, trembling a little in spite of myself. The display was incredible. Any moment the crescendo of movement, light, and sound would come, and the dancers would spill into view, clothed in their strange masks. The lights spun faster, the explosions of electrical discharge increased, sparking within our pale circle of lantern light. A man cried out, burned on the arm from a burst of fire. Soon the roiling mass of people raised their own sound of terror. Children screamed, women huddled closer to their husbands, men put up their hands in fear. The lights spun faster and faster, glowing beyond the brightest torch. Angry yellow sparks flew with reckless abandon. The metallic smell of burned sulfur and bronze filled my nostrils. Fire flashed in gouts, people disappearing within the bursts, to run madly about, burning the skin off their bodies. Men formed a line, faces grim. They held close any tools at hand. A wall of fire separated us from the safety of the inn. Screams disappeared, muddled together with the sounds of panicked breathing, and the crashing beat of my heart as it pounded in my chest. The women huddled behind the men, faces determined, white-knuckled hands holding on to their children. The lights spun faster and faster. The heat and light blinded us and pushed us into a rapidly shrinking circle. The mayor screamed a primal sound then and rushed forward into the wall of fire. His form disappeared. Sparks struck closer, the ghost fire still weaving hypnotic patterns as the men died. The screams continued on into the night. I huddled in a ball on the wet ground, my eyes closed against the torrential storm of sound all around me. I could feel the heat of fire and the wetness of blood as it spread over the ground. I lay there unmoving for how long, I do not know. Eventually there was only a deathly silence. It was more fearful than the screams had been. Then a long, mournful note rose slowly into the air. Shaking in mute fear, I opened my eyes, terrified for what I might see. Standing silently before me was the Marvel Man. His mask glinted in the strange dancing light. It was cold and terrible. He shifted his head as the mask looked down at me, lying in the dirt. I was afraid to so much as breathe. The painted onyx frown on his golden amber mask was stark and mocking. It held sadness also. As he turned, a glittering golden smile was revealed on the back of his head. There sat another mask, cold eyes watching me, as he stepped slowly away into the night. Bodies lay unmoving on the ground, charred and bleeding. The thunder was the last thing I remembered before I closed my eyes and began to weep. I stood there, the cool turquoise waters wrapping around me, tears coming unbidden to my eyes. I hadn't allowed myself to remember for so long now. I had been the only survivor. Thane and Marie had taken me in after that. They never said another word of it after that night. Turning my view, I saw Eve ahead of me, beckoning me onwards. I saw her amber eyes and suppressed a shiver. Alone with my thoughts, I looked overhead at the sun. It had just moved past its zenith. I squinted for only a second, not wanting to blind myself. Looking back down again, I tried to look deeply into the opaque depths beneath me. My mind held fast the image of the golden amber mask. I took in a deep breath and tried to forget.